Writing a blog post is one of the most effective, cost-efficient, and all-around best content marketing strategies out there in order to drive new traffic, generate new leads, make more sales, and attract new customers. But the key with blogging, just like with any other kind of content marketing, is an understanding that your results are directly tied to the quality of your blog posts. And while creating well-written and shareable content can sometimes feel overwhelming, well, I assure you the results are well worth the effort. And this is especially true when you know that the content that you're putting out there is helping you to build a bigger brand, bigger business, or help your message reach more people. So in this video, I'm gonna give you a simple framework that I call the perfect blog post to help you write a complete blog post from start all the way to finish, as well as 7 easy to follow tips to help you create truly great writing that turns readers into subscribers and customers and lifelong loyal subscribers. So let me show you how it's done. And it all starts by breaking down the elements of the perfect blog post, starting at the top with the headline. There's a great quote by advertising legend David Ogilvy that says, "On the average, 5 times as many people read the headline as read the body copy. When you have written your headline, you have spent 80 cents out of your dollar." So clearly the headline is important. Not only because this is what the vast majority of people are going to read, but more importantly because it's the headline's job to actually entice and intrigue and get people to read, well, the rest of the blog post. And while the topic of creating truly click-worthy and engaging headlines is a topic all to its own, here's a few tips to help move you in the right direction and that can turn kind of boring and ignorable headlines into those truly blockbuster hits that get someone to get drawn in and really consume everything that you've got to write. The first of which is using a question headline formula, where essentially you just take whatever it is that you are going to use as your headline and then just ask it like a question. You see, something funny happens in the minds and in the brains of a reader when they're presented with a question. And that is their subconscious wants to, nope, needs to answer it. For example, instead of using a simple and relatively straightforward headline like, "This is why most marketing fails," well, it could be turned into a question, simply really by tacking a question mark on the end of it, and phrasing it as, "Are you making these 5 marketing mistakes?" with a question mark. Another thing you can do is to use a problem-based headline and really spend some time uncovering the main problem that you're going to be solving within your blog post. See, a common mistake that many writers and content marketers make is writing content that solves a problem that a lot of people didn't even know they had. Put another way, when you give somebody a solution, but they don't really understand the problem that it's solving, well, this is kind of nice to have content instead of need to have content. And that's what you want to make, the need to have content kind. But let's move on to the next part of the perfect blog post, which is the first line. If the goal of the headline is to get them to read that first line, well then the goal of the first line is to get them to read the second line, and the third line, and the fourth, and you get the picture. This is why your main goal with that first line of your blog post is to do everything and anything in your power to hook your reader. You want to draw them in, get them to pay attention, and of course, get them to keep reading. The first line is another great place to ask a question, because again, it automatically engages their subconscious mind and force them to come up with some kind of an answer. An alternative, though, is you could simply come out with a really bold claim or statement. Ideally, something mildly contrarian or controversial, something that sort of piques their curiosity and gets them interested. For example, you may have heard that goldfish only have like a 5-second memory. Well, scientists have recently proven that this is totally false. And in fact, did you know that goldfish can actually remember things for up to 5 months? Okay, let's move on to the next part, the body. The body of your blog post is where you're going to be doing the bulk of your heavy lifting. This is where you'll present your points, you'll tell your story, you'll share any relevant statistics or facts or anything that's relevant to what you're trying to propose. Now here's the deal. When it comes to blog post length, well, there really is no perfect length. However, longer typically tends to do better. But there's a catch. Longer is better, provided it doesn't get all weird and rambly and start going off on all sorts of random tangents that have absolutely nothing to do with the main topic that you're supposed to be talking about in the first place. But more on that in just a minute. All that said, I do find that having anywhere between 3 and 7 or so subpoints for your blog post tends to be a pretty good place to start. This allows you to present your case or tell your story from a number of different angles and really give some context to what you're talking about. Plus, longer blog posts, well, they typically offer more opportunity for you to offer more value and again, back up what you've been promising in that headline and in that first line. line of your whole blog post. Anyway, I'll cover exactly how to do that in just a second when I give you some of my top tips on how to write a truly effective blog post. But first, or I guess last, we've got to cover the last part of the blog post. Next, this got confusing. The final part of the perfect blog post is none other than the conclusion. The conclusion is really, really important, and in fact, one of my biggest pet peeves when reading a blog post or consuming any kind of content or media of any kind is when you get all the way to the end of the post and you're left there wondering, what's next? This is why it is incredibly important to include a conclusion, to wrap up everything you've just said with a few key takeaway points and that all-important CTA, or call to action. Now, summing everything up in a few key takeaway points, relatively self-explanatory. But that call to action, well, this is your opportunity to guide someone towards what's next, whatever that may be. It could be something simple, like to just leave a comment or reply, or maybe share the post. Or it could be something a little more engaging, like to subscribe, or to click, or to call, or maybe even to buy something. There really is no one-size-fits-all, kind of universally acceptable call to action for the bottom of your blog post, but the key thing to keep in mind is to make sure that it's congruent with whatever it is that you've been talking about throughout the post. In other words, make sure that the next step is kind of a logical next step and not just some random path you want to take somebody down. So with the perfect blog post out of the way, now let me share with you 7 of the top tips that I've learned after a decade of blogging and building up an audience of over 100,000 subscribers. First off, we got to talk about focus. It's important to remember that your reader, the reader of your blog post, found this content for a reason, whether it was through a specific search on a search engine or by clicking a link on social media. Something caught their attention, they clicked it, they ended up on your page or post. Clearly, they have a goal, and a goal to learn more about whatever it is that they were promised when they clicked on that link and read your headline and ended up on your post. So you kind of owe it to them to deliver on what you said you're going to do. In order to do this, you need to make sure that your content is as focused on that subject as is humanly possible. The key here is to really try to, again, focus in on what you're talking about and avoid going off on too many random tangents or other ideas. It's okay to have other ideas. It's okay to even write them down, but save them for another post. Next, you need to be concise. You see, just as important as your ability to focus in on that one single topic really is, well, so is your ability to be clear and to be concise. One easy way to do this is to remember to keep your sentences short and your paragraphs short as well. This makes it easy for someone to simply scan over your content, and it also kind of encourages more consumption of your blog post because humans are built and really hardwired for success and for achievement and for progressive realization of what they're trying to do. Man, that sounded fancy. The point is, when you present somebody with a giant wall of text, it's overwhelming. It's hard to get through. It's not a lot of fun. But there's a reason that many of the social media algorithms have tapped into this sort of limitless, unlimited scroll where someone just kind of keeps whipping through content. Well, you can apply that same sort of consumer behavior to your blog posts with those shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs, allowing them to cover more ground and go through more content and really get that feeling of accomplishment. This same approach is not only used by social media algorithms and the top bloggers, but by video game designers as well, delivering a ton of achievements right at the beginning. Doing this creates kind of an addiction. With every word they read, with every sentence they make it through, with every paragraph they scroll by, the reader gets a sense of accomplishment that drives them closer to the finish. My next point is perhaps the most important one of this entire video, and that is to keep it conversational. When it comes to writing truly effective blog posts, truly effective content, truly effective marketing of any kind, it's gotta be conversational. Yep, you can pretty much consider this your permission to toss out all of the grammar rules you learned at school and just write like you talk. Again, short sentences, casual, conversational, punchy, funny, and avoiding jargon or tech talk or insider lingo like the absolute plague it is. A lot of the rules that are out there, although grammatically correct, well, they make your blog post sound pretentious and cumbersome. Much like the words pretentious and cumbersome, so don't use them. If your reader needs to pull out a dictionary or a thesaurus every time they read one of your blog posts, well, you're working too hard. And more importantly, you're making them work too hard. Nobody's gonna subscribe, nobody's gonna come back. I'm not saying to treat your readers as dumb, but rather to do some of the heavy mental lifting for them by simplifying your concept and again, keeping your writing conversational. Write so that your readers will understand and not get all bogged down in fancy talk. Next, we gotta talk about editing. Sitting down and just hammering out a 2,000 plus word blog post and hitting publish, well, really shouldn't happen. Even the great writers like Hemingway are well known for really strongly disliking their first drafts. This is why my biggest suggestion here is to simply break up your editing into a couple different phases. For the first phase, simply read through your blog post from top to finish and look at it for content. Ask yourself questions like, did you get across all of the points that you wanted to? And are there certain areas that you kind of need to beef up or support with more facts or studies or statistics? This is your chance to identify and fix any kind of issues from the top down. Also, ensure that the length matches the content depth. And if you find any sections that are getting, I don't know, like fluffy, airy, basically just kind of useless, well, feel free to cut them out. In the end, this is going to make your blog post and your overall writing significantly stronger. Once that's done, it's time for phase 2, which is where you're going to read through your blog post from top to bottom and read it out loud. You see, most of your readers, when they read your blog post, are going to do something called subvocalization. This is basically just fancy talk for saying the words out loud in their heads as they read. And well, you can make sure that there's no awkward gaps or pauses or breaks in your text by simply doing this for them ahead of time. You see, a funny thing happens when you actually read through your blog post and you say it out loud. It makes it significantly easier to identify any mistakes or errors or parts that the words just don't seem to fit together right. Then, the third and final phase, make sure to go through your blog post one last time and check for things like spelling and grammar and voice. You definitely want to save this step for last because you're going to be making some other edits previously and you don't want to miss some parts or have to change things twice. Now I appreciate this sounds like it contradicts the previous rule about ignoring grammar and ignoring all those rules and just keeping it conversational. But there are a couple things that will make your blog post look kind of like amateur hour if you miss. I'm talking about making sure that you don't have too many obvious spelling errors or that you accidentally use the wrong form of there, or there. Also, as a bit of a bonus tip, if you find this editing round completely exhausting and you're needing to make a huge amount of edits to every single blog post that you do, well, next time you write a blog post, try writing it by kind of pen and paper. Old school, longhand, or is it freehand? Whatever the case, when you write with a pen and with paper, well, most people naturally write slower, which allows them to slow down, therefore make less mistakes. Okay, next, you need to make sure that your content is actionable. Sharing stories and talking about your success and all the lessons you've learned is absolutely fine, but what your readers are really after is what you can do for them. So you always want to try to keep the focus on creating actionable content, things that your readers can actually go out there and implement and experiment with and get results from. You see, a funny thing happens when someone takes what you've written and they go out and they apply it and they get good results. That funny thing is, they come back and they want more. A good way to do this is to think of short little lists or to highlight key tasks throughout your article, essentially drawing attention to important action steps or things that they can do. Also, if you happen to include a checklist or a cheat sheet or some kind of a blueprint embedded within your blog post, well, it'll give them a reason to keep returning to that anytime that they want to experience this sometime in the future. Also makes it really shareable for other people that they may also think might also want this thing. The fact of the matter is that nothing sells like getting someone good results. Okay, next, let's talk visuals. You see, images and graphics and visual content can take a good blog post and make it great. And the key to creating truly shareable content is finding relevant and engaging and relatable graphics. Now, a bit of a warning here. Simply going to any old royalty-free stock photo site and grabbing whatever generic and random photo you happen to find and sticking it in the blog post, it's okay, but it's not great. You want to do your best to try to find visuals and graphics and images that are not only relevant to the content that you're talking about, but also that are somewhat emotionally appealing and evoke some kind of emotional response. And if you happen to have the ability to turn some of your text-based content into more graphical representations, like through an infographic or some kind of visual depiction of what you're talking about, well, it'll make your content just that much more powerful. But if that wasn't enough, well, according to Forbes, articles with images get up to 94% more views than articles without. So that's simply too much to ignore. Now, when it comes to the CTA, or the call to action, which is one of those fundamental elements that you want to include in your conclusion, the biggest mistake that I see most writers make by far is simply not having one. And again, that leaves your readers wondering, what's next? And this is why, on the topic of the call to action, or CTA, well, it's incredibly important for me to let you know that if you truly want to get more subscribers, more traffic, and more readers to your blog, then it's all going to come down to understanding and applying proven digital marketing basics and fundamentals. And this is why the very next thing you're going to want to do is check out the video I've got linked up right here on digital marketing. So make sure to check it out now, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, the next thing that'll really help you become a better digital marketer is to understand the differences between strategy and tactics and when to use them. Strategy is all the big picture stuff, and this is really where you want to focus